Is it just me? Or are you also struggling with just visualizing that John?
In fact, let me tell you, in my heart, I'm just seeing the grace and the mercy of God.
Right?
Because
there has to be a God. There has to be a God.
It has reached to us.
We had a word for that kind of a person. It was, say, mrui.
Hey,
you know, so it's just so hard to see John as
I know,
mrui.
you know, with a bandana and a cape on this side. John.
Oh my goodness.
Hello everybody and welcome to Tuesday Connect, where we take some time to connect with you concerning various aspects of our lives. My name is Kathy Matei and I will be your host today. We are so glad that you could join us. With me today are two pastors that are very, very passionate about young people, Ted Wahome and John Agagwa. Now, last week, we took some time to talk about spiritual nourishment, and we insisted on the need to have Bible study that is frequent and very intentional. And incidentally, last time that we were here, Ted told us that he was going on a fast for music and movies. Ted, welcome to this channel.
I think one of the things that I'm personally just trying to do is actually go on a fast. You know, of just, you know what, I'm going to take some time off from this. You know, I'm 2 days in. Now let's talk at the end of the month. It's something, yeah. You know, John said it's something.
When I spoke to him, he was 5 days in, so he must have restarted, which is okay. It is fine.
Something is better than nothing.
Something is better
than nothing. Yeah, guys. Yeah.
How is that going for you?
Well, I have no recollection whatsoever.
Right.
saying that. I did not say that I was, no, I'm kidding. I think it's been really going well. What I intended to do initially, I really love movies and series, is to just take a break from that. And it's now been about 9 days, thereabout. And I've really enjoyed it. I think one of the things it has done is it has allowed me to spend some time on other things, such as my hobbies, like cycling and reading a little bit more. So, yeah, it's been really good.
John, is Ted's a hobby reading?
Cycling, yes. Reading, on the other hand, no, he does. He does read.
We believe John.
Yeah. Fine. You know, John
he's read a lot of covers for books.
Right.
If Ted tells you he's read a book, ask him the cover or the content.
Right.
Yeah.
John reminds me of those friends who, when you got saved, they told you, "Wewe tunakupatia, we are just giving you 1 week, just 1 week."
But
God has held us, and we will be held till the end.
We will continue to
we
be
will
held
continue to be held till the end.
All right, this week we are going to shift gears and talk about a topic that is dear to all of us, and that's the youth and morality. And we would like to interrogate the things that are prevalent among our young people and to see what their causes are and how we can help this generation. And so let me just go straight ahead and ask Ted, tell me, what are the worrying trends that we see out here that involve our youth and their morality?
All right, that's a great question. There's a lot that we could talk about. And recently, media has been awash with some of the things that are already plaguing our young people. And one of the things that I think I can talk about is really just Hollywood. The kinds of, because again, we've just talked about that, the kinds of movies and series that we are watching and consuming are those that are really glorifying sex and violence and stuff like that. Yeah. And of course, that has had some of the effects that we will talk about a little later. And so it's worrying that most of our young people today, what they are consuming is not healthy stuff. It's the kind of things that are very, they're corrosive to the youth culture. In a sense. Yeah. And so that's just one of the things that I can think about. I'm sure John has a lot that he can add to.
Yeah, well, it's not a lot, but I think the other thing to think about is music. Just the kind of music that we can begin to see and realize at the moment that is getting a greater buy-in from especially the youth. One of the ways that you can tell the way that the culture is going It's just looking at what Ted is talking about, the movies and the series that guys are watching, but also the kind of music that guys are listening to. And one of the worrying trends is that if you go on YouTube, the most popular kind of music that you see, especially that's trending in our country, it's quite concerning actually, because it's over sexualized, the raunchy kind of music that you know, young people are beginning to own it as this is our own, this is what is Kenyan. And that's a bit worrying. So there's that, and even some of the music shows that come to our TV screens. I mean, just riding on that whole question of media, especially the late night ones, and you look at them and you're like, this is disturbing. But it's there because it has a buy-in. Young people want to see that, and so that being aired shows us that there's something happening amongst our youth that should worry us.
Yeah. Let me add one more thing here. I don't know if I'm the only one who's noticed just how much more cyberbullying is a thing in our time. Just, you know, you get into Twitter and just a random person posts just something. And they are bashed for no apparent reason. And that has become really prevalent amongst the young people in this point, right? So let me seek to involve everyone as I ask this question. You've talked about bad music, bad movies, Twitter and other sorts of social media. So I'm thinking about this kind of young person who does not listen to this kind of music, does not watch these kinds of music, is probably not even on Twitter or Instagram or any other social media sites. Why would this person be concerned? What would make them concerned? John?
Well, the reality, I think, is this, that in as much as we might not individually be consuming this kind of content, we inadvertently live in a culture where it is more and more being praised as the in thing. That therefore means that it might not affect you directly, but in the long run, it will affect you in some way. For example, say there's our parents who maybe don't, you know, listen to these kinds of music, but then your children are being affected by this kind of music. They are forming worldviews that is being affected by that. If you're you're living in purity and you're a good Christian, you're probably not engaging in that. It should worry you because chances are you're going to interact to deal with a society, marry somebody from a society that has been affected by these kinds of trends. And so I think both for those who are actively engaged and those who are not necessarily actively engaged, there should be a concern on both sides because it is a worrying trend and it has those kinds of concerns.
Right, right. So what do you think is the heart of the matter? What do you think is the reason behind young people flocking to listening to this kind of music or watching these kinds of movies or doing the things that they do on Twitter, posting those kinds of things? What do you think causes young people to engage in these things, Ted?
Fundamentally, what we're looking at is really just an innate human need. All of us have a need for acceptance and to know that we have someone's approval. If you think about little children, you know, if you have nieces or nephews, they tend to do things and want their older person, you know, a guardian or a parent to watch. You know, they'll draw something and then they'll bring it to you and they'll say, look, you know, and they want you to sort of approve of what they have done. And, you know, that thing doesn't go away. So when people are young, usually they get that approval from their parents or their guardians. But when people turn into their teenage, adolescence years, mostly what they're looking for is the approval of their peers. Right? And so that becomes sort of a place for them now to begin to look for approval.
Right.
And so what we are seeing when people are maybe trying to identify with certain icons, certain musicians, certain Hollywood stars and stuff like that is because they want to be part of the huddle. They want to be part of the group where they are loved and accepted. And so that is a human need that God has placed within us. And it's interesting that if you look at it, actually that need doesn't go away. Because even in our older years, we still want the approval of our peers. We want to do things, the way we dress, the way how we choose even spouses and stuff like that is the kind of, you know, person that people will approve of. And everything, literally everything we do is really just a question of approval, of identity and of acceptance.
Incidentally, I'm thinking about just how much influence the idols of our times have on young people.
Yep.
You know, you look at, say, for example, the kind of favor that influencers get with people who are trying to market their things. And, you know, they sort of get items from people who are trying to market their things, right?
Yeah.
And so a young person would look at that from outside and think, this is such an easy life. Think of the pop star that you have in your life, and that, you know, they're carried and ferried all over the place by limousines and planes that are chartered, that are their own. And who would not want that kind of life, right? They get into a place and everyone is just shouting their name, you know, they're there and they're just singing their praise, you know, and everyone would want such like things. And so it makes sense that people would look for identity and significance. Any thoughts, John?
Yeah, I really agree with that. It sort of is a vicious cycle, if you think about it. So there's just like as Ted has greatly mentioned, there's this, you know, a sense of acceptance and approval that you want from around you and from the people. But then it also communicates to a deeper need to belong. So if you push back against what everybody likes, then you tend to be the odd one out. And especially for young people, that's a big deal. You want to fit in, you want to be accepted, you want to belong and find that this is the group that I belong to. Or belong with. So if everybody is saying that this is the in thing in social media or the kind of music or the kind of series, like you're not watching that series, then you can't fit in. So in a bid to fit in, then you want to watch that. And so there's it becomes a vicious cycle. So I say it a vicious cycle because so you watch that so that you belong, and then the more you tend to go on watching that, then you want to watch more of it, and the more you want to watch of it, you want to belong. Yeah, so I think there's all those dynamics that would actually lead to the kind of statistics that we are seeing, that this is the kind of media that most young people are consuming.
Yeah. And I used to see a lot of young people, for instance, and I think, well, at least before COVID. Nowadays we speak BC, before COVID or after COVID. I think I used to see a lot of young people in the streets of Nairobi here, in the city center, take photos, which they would then post on Instagram.
Yeah.
And I would often ask myself, you know, like, what's the deal here? We never used to do those kinds of things in a sense, but ours was more of a selfie culture. And I think it's this whole idea of if my photo gets a lot of likes, then I equate that with a sense of worth.
Yeah.
I see that the more likes I have, then the more worth and acceptance I have. The less likes I have, the less worth and acceptance I have. And so I think those are some of the things that need to be investigated on an existential level before we even think about, okay, so what would be potential solutions?
Yeah. I think that's true. Just thinking about it on that line, my own experience when so I grew up in a family, in a very Christian family.
Right.
Both my mom and dad brought us up in such as to espouse biblical truths. So on Sunday we were in church, we attended youth week programs during the week. So my the first time I in a sense, breathed the air of freedom was in high school, right? Because I went to boarding school. In fact, I really wanted to go to boarding school because I would be finally, you know, I can see, you know, I can be off of my parents and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah.
So when I went to boarding school, I went with a very, very clear agenda. I wanted to know what life is like outside the church. So I did not tell anybody that I was a Christian. Right. Nobody knew that I had ever been a Christian. So I just went in and I swung to the extreme. So CU, I didn't go to CU. There was always enter and CU.
At the same time.
Then we all know where you are. They were at the same time,
CU.
right?
I know, right?
Yeah. And where was Ted? Please tell us.
Entertainment. Ted was in and we will discuss about what Ted was doing there.
Please, let us do that.
Yeah. So I think what that meant is the kind of people that I obviously attracted then were guys that were not Christians, that didn't espouse the kind of values that I had grown up with. And that was the cool thing. So because I was now close with the bad boys, right? And that was the cool thing. Was it not for God's intervention, I think in my third form, I was probably way well on my way to expulsion. Because now I was in the prefect's bad boy list. I was in the teacher's bad boy list. Like it was just, it was terrible.
Is it just me? Or are you also struggling with just visualizing that John?
In fact, let me tell you, in my heart, I'm just seeing the grace and the mercy of God.
Right?
Because
there has to be a God. There has to be a God.
It has reached to us.
We had a word for that kind of a person. It was, say, mrui.
Yeah,
You know, so it's just so hard to see John as
I know,
mrui.
you know, with a bandana and a cape on this side. John.
Oh my goodness. It was
But
bad.
God.
God.
Yeah. And maybe, I don't know whether this is the forum to mention it. Even before that, in our Class 8 final party, where, you guys are trying to finish KCP and stuff, I remember actually there was a time I attempted, well, not hard drugs, just soft core bad ones.
Okay.
But it was because it was the in thing. Other kids were doing it.
Right.
And I just thought this looks nice and guys look like they're enjoying this and it's the in thing. So I tried it. Thank God I didn't like it. Never did it since. But I'm imagining for many people, maybe they do it and they enjoy it. So there's this whole trying to buy into that and trying to want for people to accept you that can actually lead you on a very terrible path.
Right.
Yeah.
Ted, have you had any experiences?
I was a very good kid. God sorted out many of my issues when I was young, so no. Yeah.
Okay. Ted
Who am
has
I
an
kidding?
album, guys. Ted has an album.
Yeah, a photo album of my family members, and everyone. But what Kathy is trying to hint at is, actually, guys, when I was younger, I did attempt and try to become a rapper. And,
not a rapper like for gifts, like a rapper for singing, for music.
Would you like to drop a few lines?
absolutely not. All such evidence has been confiscated. There is no evidence out there. So nothing that you will find, I don't have my rap sheet and all that. I don't have any, those things recorded. So sorry about that. Yeah. But I did try because I think for me, it's the kind of thing that told me if I do this. In fact, I used to quite a lot of times dream and just, myself on the stage holding my mic. You know the way rap guys
Yeah.
They
have
don't-
to
yeah,
hold
they
their
don't
mic.
hold
Like
the
they're
mics
drinking
like
water.
this. Like they're drinking water. You have to hold your mic like this,
Yeah.
and then you have to say things like, yo, and stuff, jia, and stuff like that. So
We believe you now.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I used to imagine myself on the stage, just rocking the masses and stuff like that. Because I think at the end, really, what I was looking for was acceptance. I wanted to know that I belong, as John said. And so that was one of my ways to sort of get that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that has actually happened, I think today or yesterday or in the past week, that literally shows the effects of these things that we have talked about is an incident, I think, in the US where we have COVID parties. Young people are holding COVID parties where they bring young people together for a bash, right? And then they bring one person who has COVID, and this is the interesting bit. They harness cash, right, amongst themselves, and then the person who will get COVID first from this person who has COVID is paid.
Yes.
I mean, how weird is that?
Saddening.
Do you have any more effects, Ted?
Yeah, I mean, just back home, recently we were treated to some worrying statistics about what's happening amongst our young people. And I think there was a report that came out that there is quite a number of teenage pregnancies just this year, I mean, I don't have all the numbers with me, but at least in Nairobi, there was about 11,000 cases, thereabout. Machakos, I think 3,900. And so, I mean, regardless of whether those numbers are accurate or not, there is an issue. A lot of teenage pregnancies means then that people are treating sex as a very casual encounter.
Yeah.
Sex stops becoming a mingling of souls between two people who have covenanted with one another as husband and wife. It becomes a meeting of bodies. It's just something that you do here and there. And so it's definitely worrying. And I'm sure that many parents right now are concerned about that because that's not the kind of thing you want to, you know, you don't want your child to come and tell you, hey, dad, mom, I'm sorry, I'm pregnant. And stuff. So that's just, I think, one of the indicators.
Incidentally, when you talk about casual sex, we've had so many cases, increasing levels of young people coming out and saying, I went for this bash here, I went for this bash there, I was dragged, I woke up, you know, with maumivus and in someone else's bed here or there, having been raped. You know, and it feels like the sanctity of sex has been almost ripped off from the minds of the young people that we seem to be ministering to at this point in time, where they just feel like, I mean, it's just sex, you know, it's sex, and if you're careful, which actually, I mean, family planning methods have become the thing. You find a person who's maybe 15 having pills. You wonder.
And it really goes back to the discussion that we've had about the media, because this is what is influencing. And that's why we said that you might not necessarily be doing it, but we live in a culture that it will affect us in some way, because that's what our young people are seeing in the media. In most of these series and movies and music, sex is painted as a commodity, a very cheap commodity that you can give to anyone. And so because that is increasingly being made the norm, I mean, it happens all the time in the movie until, you know, most people have become, it's no longer concerning. So it does form your worldview to that extent. I think there's something we were discussing earlier, and I was saying something Ravi Zacharias used to say, that people will not necessarily change your worldview or your way of living by the front door, using the front door of reason, but they will use the back door of arts. In other words, you're not necessarily going to a class and be like, okay, so now, you know, do this, you know, sexually and stuff. No, they'll just put it so much in their arts that you're seeing it so often, and then that's beginning to show in how you live your life. I think one of the other ways that it's probably closer to young people's hearts, especially people who are looking for spouses and thinking about stuff like that, is when you think about the kind of picture that people see of what are the qualifications for, even when you talk about sex in the movies and series and music, for guys especially, they're looking for a certain kind of body, a certain kind of girl that looks a certain kind of way, that talks a certain kind of way, and that's being espoused as that's what's beautiful. So how that's affecting guys is they are trying to look for that in the real world. Like you come off Instagram and social media and try to look for that kind of girl in the real world,
and you will not find it.
And you will not find that. And then for ladies, I think one of the ways that affects them is they especially the younger ones trying to deal with esteem issues, they're trying to be that girl. And maybe God didn't make them that way. That's just impossible. There's a lot of that's not true. Those people don't live like that every day. It's absolutely impossible.
Photoshop can make significant differences on anyone. You know.
So you get a culture where even the basis that people are pursuing, the lifelong, which is supposed to be the most meaningful relationship in your life, is absolutely wrong. And if they continue in that trend, then they're not necessarily setting themselves up for marriage, because eventually at some point you do realize that looks can't keep that together. But if you've grown up in a culture where this is it, this is the fundamental way that I'm going to make this decision, then a lot of what is necessary and important is excluded. So I think if you look at it in the long run, the damages that it is doing to our culture and our society are more than we have time to even begin to expound upon in this discussion.
Ted, John, I know that you had said something about suicides. in Kenya. Would you just
Yes.
like to mention that?
You actually mentioned it when you talk about cyberbullying. One of the things that has done because of this, especially Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all these social media platforms, there's almost this competition who will diss this person the most.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so somebody posts something and then there's all this negativity, abuses, bullying, and stuff. So in a culture where you've already espoused likes, right? You go into, you post a picture and you start monitoring likes because that's how you, and then if it doesn't, in fact, I know there are people, if it doesn't get to a certain number of likes, they pull it down.
Yeah.
They put something else and stuff. So you're monitoring your value based on how people like you. So in that kind of culture, suicides will inevitably be more. It's the WHO that did statistics for our country in 2019. That's last year, sometime in May, and the suicide rate, I think for the previous year, was 1,408 in 2018. 1,408. If you do the math, that's actually 4 people in a day. The majority of which are between 15 and 30 years. There's a story that was on Nation Media recently of a lady who was not able to, was laughed at in school because of some really private stuff happening to her, and everybody laughed at her, sadly including some teachers. And what ended up happening is she took her own life. Now, why is it affecting her to that extent? Part of it is she's probably grown up in a culture, and in this culture where we are saying likes is the thing. So if I do something that people don't like, then it means I'm not valuable because my value has been attached to whether people like me or not. So it inevitably increases not just suicide, but also depression. Trying to match up with the kind of lifestyles that you see on social media and on Instagram, and like, I want to live like that. And if you're always comparing your life to the kind of life that people are flashing on social media, there's a sense of depression, like I'm not living like that. What's wrong with me? And so there's depression, there's suicide. The effects are just it's terrible.
So what then are the solutions, guys? What can we do? I mean, these young people are growing up in a full society, right? A society that has parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, and just neighbors who are older and wiser. What are the solutions? What are some of the things that we can do to help our young people? Maybe John?
I think one of them is just, if you go back to the problem, because the problem is the things you mentioned, the question of acceptance and the question of identity. I think firstly it's to begin to formulate a worldview that drastically changes that. And as ministers in the youth ministry especially, one of the things that we know definitely will form the core part of your identity is becoming a Christian. Understanding and making Jesus the very center of your life, because then that shifts your identity, seeking identity and significance from anything else, especially things that will definitely bring your life down to someone who loves and cares for you, and that's Christ Jesus. Because the truth is, social media, music, I mean, all these things, they might give you a sense of identity, but the truth is at some point they will disappoint you. You will never match up to the standard that they set for you. The beautiful thing about the gospel is that Jesus will, of necessity, set a far higher standard for you than social media ever could. But his end, you'll almost be assured that you will most of the time not meet the standard that Jesus will set for you. But the truth is that no matter how many times you fail in the standards that Christ sets for you, he has already died to ensure that you will never, that he loves you nonetheless. He accepts you nonetheless. So you have someone who sets up for you a higher standard. That means you're always living and trying to do better with your life because you're seeking to please him who died for you. But at the same time, it will never crush you because you know even if you should fail, he loves you still and that he continues to accept you. So I think that the whole question of identity is really is one of the key areas, and it's spoken of and I think clearly addressed in the gospel.
Right. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I think one other thing that I could add is just the whole question of discipleship in the home.
Right.
Because I do feel like at least what is clear in the scriptures, is that the primary avenue for discipleship is the home, right? You go to places like Deuteronomy 6, you see how God instructs the fathers and the mothers to talk about the laws of God when they lie down, when they sit down, when they're walking across, to put it on their doorposts. In other words, God's word was supposed to be central to the Hebrew, to the Jewish home. And I mean, even in the New Testament, for us as Christians, that hasn't changed, really. One of the things that I think I might want to mention as someone who's done youth ministry now for a couple of years is sometimes parents will abdicate, in a sense, the responsibility to disciple their children to the church. And if you think about it, sometimes as youth ministers, all we have is like 2 hours a week with these young people. That is not enough to disciple those young people, right? So what youth ministers do, what youth workers, what the church really does is to come alongside parents. And so this then makes things like family worship incredibly important, you know? Fathers and moms who can, you know, just worship together around the dinner, around the dinner table, after dinner, and just talk about God's word, talk about their own challenges, talk about the grace of God in their own lives. I think one of the things that perhaps could be potentially discouraging to parents is they think, I'm not yet there yet. I'm not yet there. I'm not good enough in a sense. And so I mean, I've always been encouraged by a preacher who said that it's not about the perfection of your life. It's about the progression of your life. It's not about the fact that you never fail. It's about what do you do when you actually fail? And can your children begin to see that you're surely a repentant person? You know, you are growing in your and maturing in your Christian faith. And if they watch that, they'll say, you know what, Dad and Mom are not perfect, but they're Christian. I can see them live a Christian life. I can see them say sorry. I can see them walk with Jesus, and I love that. You know, I think that's such a wonderful heritage to be able to pass on to our children.
John, any thoughts on the role of the church in all this, in terms of discipleship and stuff like that?
Again, I really agree with what Ted has said. I think the primary role to disciple the youth, it will definitely lie in the home, because they're there most of the time. And so, the youth pastors in the church can say certain things and preach a certain way, but if the youth are not seeing that being lived out in their homes, then you in a sense live out that proverb. Do not tear down with your life what you're preaching with your words. But I think beyond that, it's one of the things that especially I think that we've tried to do here at Mamlaka and will continue to do, especially post this COVID season, is the whole, when we do the youth Sundays, where everybody, all the youth come to the main service and they do service together with us. There's something about that, just seeing your parents, your mom, your dad, just worshiping and seeing them love God and live out their Christian life. There's something about that leaves an impact, I think, upon our hearts. So I think that's critical. One of the other ways that I think that is essential is in the church, the congregation themselves, taking up the responsibility, the individual congregants taking up responsibilities upon themselves to work with the younger people. I think sometimes there is an assumption that the young people do not want the older voice. They don't want that we don't want the older people to speak into our lives. That actually that's quite far from the truth. The truth is that we admire most of the people that we see, and we really wonder, how did you get there? How come your relationship with God has stood strong? How have you done your marriage? And so one of the things that will be very encouraging for a young person, in as much as definitely the younger people need to approach the older people and ask questions and avail themselves for mentorship and relationships, I think there is a responsibility upon the older people as well, those who've done life a little longer than us, to approach us and ask those kinds of questions. I think we see this indicated in the scriptures in a place, I think, where Paul says that let the older women teach the younger women. He puts the responsibility on the older women to teach the younger women in that context when about to love their husbands and stuff like that. So there is a place for the church as the congregation. That proverb that we used to have, growing up, the African child is brought up by the whole village.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think we should probably change. It's still true, but we should probably change it to the church. Like let the young people be brought up by the church. So that if you see somebody erring and going the wrong way, take it upon yourself as your responsibility. Be like, okay, why are you doing this? Why are your parents? Who is in your life and stuff like that. So I think if we decide as a people to take interest in the young people that God has brought in our lives, in our sphere of influence, then we might be well on the way to save the next generation.
Right. Asante sana. Ted, any final words?
I'm just remembering on a lighter note. Do you guys remember how, I can remember the number of times that I was chapwad, I was beaten by not my parents, by people who are not my parents.
Wow, wow.
I have stories upon stories of how neighbors took the responsibility to discipline me. And then now they brought you to your mom, right?
Oh.
And then now they started explaining what you had done. And you are thinking, mom will say, hey, no, why would you, beat my child? Hey! They turn to you and they say, okay, so now this is for what I've just been told. Like, and they beat you in front of this other person. Just to enhance that. And I think you're right, that maybe as a church, we can come together around young people.
There's a friend of mine who told the story of how God kept her from drugs and smoking. She always thought that it was very cool to see somebody with a cigarette smoking it. Like, she just thought, this is really cool. Especially the bangs and stuff like that. Those illegal ones are not good for you at all. She used to see that and was like, that's really good. That's really good. But she knew she couldn't do it at home. And she was like 4 or 5 years old. So what she did is she went, and then one day she found, how, especially when you're done smoking, you just throw it down. So she found one that was not as, it was not yet off. So she picked it. And then she walked a long distance. And you know what is a long distance in the mind of a child? It's not probably very long. But she walked where she felt that she was as far as possible from home. Then when she got somewhere, sat on a bench, and she was now ready to smoke. So she took it. Just before she could smoke it, I think an elderly man was passing there and see this, 4 or 5 year old girl holding a cigarette and just wondered what's wrong with her. So he slapped her. He slapped her so hard. So she cried and ran. Cried and ran home. But now the thing is, she could not say why she's crying. Because why were you slapped? And who is it that slapped you? So in as much as I'm not advocating that we should go around slapping other people's children, something about that story, she says that every time she was tempted to try and look for those kinds of things, she would remember that. And she always felt like somebody will show up from somewhere and slap her. And so she never got into those drugs and stuff like that. So I think this echoes the point.
John, let me bring you closer home. So I know that both of you guys know that I studied outside Nairobi. So yes, I studied outside Nairobi. So what you don't know is that I didn't necessarily study outside Nairobi because of the grades that I got. I studied outside Nairobi because my mom was convinced that I would not handle the peer pressure in Nairobi.
Watoto wa Nairobi.
Watoto wa Nairobi. I mean, I was a Nairobi mtoto all my life. But my mom was convinced that I would not be able to handle peer pressure in Nairobi. So she called my shosho. And told my shosho, Ebu Eda, go to that school. Ebu, find out if they have space. Guys, as I've been saying here that I went to the or they. You know these schools in Nairobi that starts with the and there? I wouldn't even tell you which school I went to. But the Lord was gracious. But I really appreciate. I don't know if maybe I'd have gone to a school in Nairobi and I'd have probably been fine. But I really appreciate the fact that my mom thought beyond studies for me, for my well-being, and thought into aspects of what kind of friendships will I make, what kind of influence will I have, and that made her decide to take me to Muranga, and I'm really appreciative of that, and I get you when you say that parental involvement is important. Right. We have been talking about last words, and we have seriously now come to an end. So let me just ask again,
Yeah.
Ted. Do you have anything that you would like to say
Okay.
as a matter of coming to an end?
Yeah, I think maybe what I can say is if you look at both church history and the Bible, it is clear that God has an agenda for young people.
Yeah.
He intends to use young people. There's a lot that we can glean just from looking at history, at what God does and God's heart for the young. In a sense. Actually, one of the interesting things, as I just think about this, is that in Kenya, the median age is 19. Most of our population is young people.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, sometimes I walk through town and I see all these young people. Of course, I'm a young person myself, but I'm just like, wow, we are. I qualify for youth fund. So it would behoove us to really think about the fact that God actually uses young people. God has an agenda for them. And maybe that's why Satan is really out to attack young people. Before the Industrial Revolution, young people used to go and work with their parents. If your father was a farmer, most likely you would become a farmer. If your dad was a carpenter, you most likely become like a carpenter. And what happened is that people took up responsibilities of adulthood quite early. People married earlier.
Yeah.
They became, fathers and husbands maybe by the age of 16, 17 to 18.
Right.
But now with the coming of the Industrial Revolution, with factories and industry and stuff like that, what happened is that there was this gap because now people suddenly needed specialized education. And so you needed to spend longer time in school. And so it created this gap, so to speak, of these years where you're sort of not a child, but you're also not an adult, in a sense. And I think about that not necessarily as a curse or anything of the sort, but really just as an opportunity, right? I hinted earlier at church history and just looking at the Bible. We know from history, for instance, that Jesus actually, the 12 disciples that he walked with, everyone except Peter was actually a teenager, so to speak. There was a point where Jesus went and he asked for a copper coin to give as a temple tax. And he only asked Peter. And that was eligible for people who were above the age of 18, I believe, which tells you that even the rest were quite young. So can you imagine God delivering the entire mission of propagating the church and stuff like that to a group of teenagers, so to speak? And that gives me great hope. Most of the kings, in Israel were young people. And so God has an agenda. And I'd like to encourage every young person, to make the most of your youthful years, to expend yourself for God, to learn about God, and also to learn about the different things and work that you might be able to engage in. This is the time to grow your mind with all kinds of knowledge so that you can be a useful person in society. So mine is just a quest to say that I think there's great hope for young people. And thankfully, God has already said that he will build his church. Nothing, even the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So he will be able to do what he wants with the youth.
Right.
Yeah.
John?
Thanks so much, Ed. I think just to back on the earlier illustration of how, for us young people, the thing that is really big for us, and I know it just changes, it's really big for everybody, it just changes in seasons, but there's a whole question of acceptance, belonging, significance, and identity. And it's something that comes from when we are kids, just like Ted said, when you're smaller and you kick a ball and you'd always look at your dads like, hey, Dad, because you want them to see just how far you kicked it. And if they were clapping, then you try kicking a lot farther than you had kicked it the previous time. And we sort of grow up with this innate desire to be praised, innate desire to be affirmed. And that's what the world is offering young people through their movies. It's offering acceptance, significance, look like this and people will like you. Take a photo, post it, and you will see the praises of people and stuff like that. So I think that it's the right desire, it's the right instinct corrupted by the world because it's a God-given instinct. And so my thoughts, I think, especially to the younger people, is find that you're looking for. You will ultimately, or rather, what you're looking for, you will ultimately find it in Jesus Christ, because the Bible does tell us there is a day that will come that the creator of all the universe, getting one like from Jesus is worth a million, a billion, gazillion likes from anybody else. Because in that day, the Bible tells us that Jesus will look at many of those that would have lived for him and he will say to them, good and faithful servant, well done, come into the kingdom of your master. That will be the approval that we have been looking for all our lives. It will be to look at the God of all creation, the God that made the universe, the God that made any person who likes your photo or doesn't like it, the God that made that person, the God that created technology, the God that made everything that exists. The day he looks into our eyes and says to us, you good and faithful servant. That's what we are looking for. So my advice to young people is live for that. That's the one like that you will get that will last forever. It is the like that will surpass all the other likes that you have ever gotten, and it will make up for all the likes that you never got.
Amen. Amen. All right, we have come to the end of this conversation. I hope that you have been helped by the thoughts that have been shared here. As we come to a close, I'd just like to share something, a portion of scripture. And I know that this is our desire for all the young people that we have worked with and all the young people really in the world. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, this is what it says. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And this is our prayer for you, young person who is watching us, that you would be able to think of things that are pleasing to our God. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you would be able to join us another day for another episode of Tuesday Connect. Until then, from all of us, God bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. See you next time.